Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you. Good to see you. Also, maybe I'll mention I live in the Boston metro area. I live in Concord, Massachusetts. That's where I am right now. I actually live in a boarding school out here, the Middlesex School, where my husband is the director of mindfulness. So all students at Middlesex take at least a semester of mindfulness with him when they get to school, and then can keep taking meditation and mindfulness. Yeah, and I also grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire. So in some ways, CIMC was kind of my closest Sangha. Even though I've always found it a little challenging to come in to the city. So it's nice that we can do this at a distance too. So it's good to be with you. And the other thing that I want to mention is before I helped to found Inward Bound Mindfulness Education, I was working in climate change policy and finance. So that was my education. That's what I studied. I studied environmental engineering with the intention to save the world through renewable energy. That was my goal. And I pretty quickly realized that there were a lot of very smart people who were figuring out the technology, and that was not the issue. It wasn't that we needed more smart people working on solar panels, that there was something else that was stopping us from actually addressing and starting to solve the climate challenge and the environmental challenge. So I think my life since then has really been looking at that question, like what is going on? What's stopping us? And it's not, climate change is just one manifestation of the violence and inequity and harm that we cause as humans. There's so many other very clear manifestations of that. But it's one that has been a really alive and important part of my life and heart. And it actually feels really alive. These topics are very alive for me today. This question of how do we build resilience? So first of all, how do we actually start to face the truth? Basically the truth of dukkha. And then how do we be resilient and respond in the face of that? This came vividly to my mind just a few hours ago. I was working with a coaching meeting with a mentor of mine, a woman named Mickey Kashtan, who I highly recommend. She comes from the nonviolent communication world. And in that meeting, she was bringing up the question of like collapse of societal systems. Like what would that, and the view that potentially that's like where we're headed. And I mean, in some ways it's not really it's a view, but it kind of seems like there's a certain inevitability when we look at the trajectories that we're headed on. As a global society, with at least those in power, the cultures that are in power. And so again, this question is so alive. Like, what do we do when, like, just to imagine that possibility? And it's particularly intense for me in this moment because I'm 8 months pregnant. So I'll have I'm expecting a baby early March. If we were in person, it would be very obvious. So I'll just, so you can see, I'm not making it up. Yeah. So I'm bringing a being into this world that looks like it might be on a trajectory towards what Mickey today was calling collapse, and maybe that's the word we might use. Certainly struggle. So what happens? What happens inside of us? What happens inside of you when that is even raised, that possibility? And maybe you live with it. Maybe there's something that's alive in you, or maybe there's something else that brings a sense of intensity to you, your own mortality. Just reflecting on the history of systemic racism in the United States can have that same overwhelming intensity for me. Just take a moment to just what happened. What does your mind do? I know for me, this today, first thing was like, I kind of wanted to go a little bit into denial. No, here's all the reasons that's not true or not possible, or it's better than that. And then what do we need to support ourselves to actually touch the truth of life, in this part, the dukkha of life? So that's really what I want to explore together. And I really say this together, and I'd like to start together because I think one of the things we need is each other. As like a primary thing that we need is the Sangha. I love the sutta where Ananda goes to the Buddha. Ananda, his close attendant, goes to the Buddha and says, "Hey Buddha, I think I figured this out. I think the Sangha is half of the holy life." And the Buddha says, "No, Ananda, you're wrong. It's not half the holy life. It's all of the holy life. The Sangha is all of the holy life," is what the Buddha responded. And so I've been reading and getting inspired a lot about mourning. How do we learn how to mourn? So one way that I see that we start to build resilience is through mourning. By seeing the world that we want and how things are and that gap, using mourning to bridge that gap instead of bridging it with violence. And I really believe we need each other to mourn. And I think a lot of more, maybe we can call it intact cultures, or long-lasting cultures knew that we need each other to mourn. There's so many rituals and norms that are built into culture to mourn together. And that, at least in my white American culture, was lost. I wasn't really taught about how to mourn. You get like 5 days off of work and then it's back to normal or something like this. So what I've also been reading about is like how culture is actually like a digestive, can help us digest. It's like the immune digestive system for humans. And together we can create kind of a collective nervous system, in the sense that sometimes there's certain kinds of pain and suffering that is too big. It's too big for any individual nervous system, that it's actually kind of impossible for any one of us to hold the intensity of some of these forms of dukkha that we're facing. That we need a collective nervous system. We need to come together so that this bigger nervous system can actually metabolize, digest, hold the suffering. So for these reasons, I would love to invite us tonight, as much as you're willing, to connect. And one way, just as a simple way of starting, is let's see. So Nicholas, can folks write in the chat? Is that possible? Okay, great. So one way that we can do it, if you're willing to put, just to write into the chat, how are you doing tonight? How are you doing? What are you bringing with you? How are you feeling? How is it feeling to hear even already some of this that I've raised? Yeah, so just like a check-in with your heart, body, mind in the chat. And another way, also, if you're willing, yay, to whatever degree you're willing to turn your video on, it can be sweet to see each other even at a distance. So Peggy says, confidence in the young people. Me too. Totally. Susan, glad to be here. Yay. Congrats on the baby. Happy. See John Christopher's here. Great. I'm happy that people know each other. Relaxed, hopeful. Thinking about the homeless tonight in the cold. Anxious and hopeless. Yeah, uplifted by my students. The hurt of a reminder of the truth. Calm, frustration. Sack of gravel. Thanks, Nellie. Despairing. And I invite you, just as you read the chat, just to let it land in your body. Each pains and the joys, sorrows, let it land in your body. Feel if we can hold each other's experience. Angry. Okay. Thank you. Flow of change. Sweet. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who's shared, has been willing to share. And I would love to, at some point, offer some breakout rooms at some point, of like small groups to connect. And we'll give you choice when we go there to, if you want to go into a group or not. But yeah, just thinking about ways that we can really connect more interpersonally throughout this talk. Okay, so what is resilience? Yeah. What is resilience? When I reflect on resilience, there's two aspects. One feels like an ability to face the truth. So it's not a denial. It's actually connecting with, being present with what's difficult, what's painful, and yet also having a sense of flexibility. There's like a strength of facing, but also softness to be tender and respond and receive and be flexible. And when I think about what supports me in being resilient, it is totally this practice. The triple gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Yeah. Amelia is writing, resilience, ability to give space to the gap that you mentioned, to give space in the morning. Yeah. So the triple gem is really the foundation of my resilience. And the first part of that being the Buddha, of like the possibility of waking up. Just like that possibility could actually be free. That the Buddha taught that this is what he experienced, and many people have experienced that kind of freedom and liberation, that it's possible. It is possible for any human. There's not something particular or special about the Buddha, or there's some special things, but he's just a human. These wise awakened beings like Tai, someone mentioned, Thich Nhat Hanh's recent passing. He's a human. There's a human body and mind and emotions, thoughts that fundamentally are no different from us. And so that possibility, that recognition, is something that gives me a sense of resilience. And then the teachings, the practices, and the Sangha community, wise friendship and community. And what I wanted to talk about tonight in particular of the practices are the Brahma Viharas, and how we can practice with the Brahma Viharas to support us in the face of whatever personal or collective suffering we may be experiencing. And so as we get to equanimity, the fourth of the Brahma Viharas, to me that is bringing in a lot of the wisdom aspect of the Dharma. So the emptiness and the interdependence aspects of the Dharma. So it's kind of all embedded within these Brahma Viharas. So I want to talk about first metta and mudita. I'll kind of bring them together, just because I'm actually teaching a 6-week course right now going through the Brahma Viharas. So we could spend a long time on each one. But I'll bring metta and mudita in together. And so loving kindness and then joy, appreciative joy. And I love that the Brahma Viharas start with metta. And also, if you're familiar with Joanna Macy's work, she begins with gratitude, begins the work. So Joanna Macy, who's another amazing being on the planet, still with us, who's brought Buddhist Dharma to environmental action. And she starts with gratitude. And so the idea here is like resourcing ourselves in love, grounding ourselves in love. Love, and then with mudita, joy, seeing the good, seeing what's good, letting ourselves feel joy, experience joy. Sometimes I have, I notice a tendency in myself that if things are bad in the world or people are suffering and I'm connecting with that suffering, that for some reason I shouldn't feel happy or joyful, because that sort of would mean like I didn't care. I don't care enough. Like this question, okay, can I entertain a trajectory towards potential collapse and yet also feel joy? Like, how could those two go together? And again, there's a sense in me that like I need to just be in the pain if I really cared. But what I learned from the Brahma Viharas is that that's not the truth of it. That actually we can resource ourselves in love and joy, and that's actually going to strengthen our ability to be with the truth of things, to be with the suffering. And it's also really trauma informed. So I've done a lot of somatic experiencing training and also my own therapy as I've worked with my own trauma, personal trauma. And they talk the two practices or common practices within somatic experiencing, this trauma therapeutic approach. One is this term called pendulation. This is a term called pendulation. So the idea of pendulation within this healing modality is that, so it's this idea of a pendulum swinging. Over here might be the pain that we're experiencing, the trauma. And then over on the other side is what feels okay right now, what feels good, settled, relaxed, happy, or resourced. In the teaching, the therapeutic healing modality is to pendulate and just touch the pain and then come back to the joy. I feel like I should have some stuffed animals to do this example, but I have like a shark and then like a koala bear that you could imagine those. So it'd be pendulating between what's really painful and what's really okay and wonderful and joyful and what feels good in our body, or these qualities of metta, joy. And the practice, the theory of this practice, which has been hugely healing for me in my life and then many, many people, is that that actually it's not skillful to just dive into the suffering. And actually it's taught like the kind of approach of catharsis is not necessarily helpful for human nervous systems or for healing trauma and pain. That actually is resourcing someone in goodness and joy, helping them find where in their body feels okay, where in their life is working, settling into that. And then once you feel like you've got energy and also curiosity, energy and curiosity, that's always what I'm looking for. Then you go and touch the pain. And when you touch the pain, you just start by touching the edges. Just a quick moment, you touch the edge and then come back to what feels okay, to the ease, to the joy. Steady yourself, get grounded, come back and touch the pain for a moment. Another really influential teacher for me is Resmaa Menakem, who's written a lot about this and working with racial pain and how we need to learn how to actually steady our bodies so that we can come and touch that pain. So we come to the joy, what's working, and then touch in. And that titration piece is that, like, if you think about chemistry class, at some point, maybe you took chemistry, and titration is when, like, you just like drop one drop at a time of a chemical, and then at some moment it would like change suddenly the chemical makeup. So that's sort of this sense of titration, that we're just one small drop at a time touching the pain and suffering, and just doing that slowly, that gently, the transformation of healing can happen. In my training in somatic experiencing, the teacher said at some point, if as a therapist, that if it feels like you're watching paint dry, then you're doing it right. So that healing can have that much slowness, that much tenderness, that much gentleness. So I offer that sometimes I know in myself, I think I need to push myself into the pain or suffering or some kind of forcefulness. And this has just been such a helpful transformation. So I invite you, as you, like, if whatever pain is happening in your life, if you want to be facing some of these more global dukkha's, to first get yourself resourced, to look around and notice where the love is, to notice where the goodness is, where the helpers are, where the joy is. Find what fills you up and resources you. Ground in that. When you feel steady, when there's energy, curiosity, then you go and touch the suffering. And we can do that with that intention. So we're not going to the joy out of denial or avoidance. There's I just learned this term from a young person I work with, toxic positivity, of just like, oh, it's fine, it's great. So we're certainly not encouraging that. It's just noticing, yeah, and also the snow is beautiful as the sun sparkles on it in the morning. And also, babies are so cute. I can't wait to cuddle mine, even no matter what is happening in the world. So I want to read this quote from Bell Hooks, who also recently passed this past year. So this is about the earth. She writes, when we love the earth, we are able to love ourselves more fully. I believe this. The ancestors taught me it was so. As a child, I loved playing in dirt, in that rich Kentucky soil. That was a source of life. Before I understood anything about the pain and exploitation of the Southern system sharecropping, I understood that grown-up Black folks loved that land. I could stand with my grandfather, Daddy Jerry, and look out at a field of growing vegetables, tomatoes, corn, collards, and know that this was his handiwork. I could see the look of pride on his face. as I expressed wonder and awe at the magic of growing things. When we love the earth, we're able to love ourselves more fully. And then this is from Lorraine Hansberry. I wish to live because life has within it that which is good, that which is beautiful, that which is love. Therefore, since I have known all of these things, I have found them to be reason enough, and I wish to live. Moreover, because this is so, I wish others to live for generations and generations and generations and generations. I wish to live because life has within it that which is good, that which is beautiful, that which is love. And so also when we start with love, mudita, with metta, then the action, like Lorraine is saying, I want to live because life has that has within it that which is good. The action is rooted in the love. Whatever we do next can be rooted in the love, rather than starting with like the fear, or anger, rage, all these things that I feel when I read the news, for example. So it's rooting ourselves in the earth, in life, in what is good, as we begin to face the truth of things. Maybe we'll just take a pause here and take a breath together. And I'll invite some sharing in the chat again, if you're willing to share. Where is there joy in your life now? Or what do you love? And again, as we read, you can feel your body let it land. Notice if there can be that mudita, that appreciative joy, the sympathetic joy, as people share. My family learning, swinging on a swing set under the stars. Small moments of freedom and Sangha study and sutta reading. My granddaughters hiking, skiing, playing tennis. When I place a piece in a really hard puzzle, growth, birds, nature, the joy at the snowstorm Saturday, trees, dogs, cookies, dancing, being secluded, dancing, cat, friends, husband, wife and kids, dog, teaching, the light of early morning. Thank you. Again, just taking a moment, receiving that, noticing how your heart and body respond. Is there a sense of the mudita, of taking some joy, and the joy that each person has found. Thank you. And then we can shift our reflection or attention to karuna, compassion, the second of the Brahma Viharas. Karuna. And this is also one that's there's so much inside this word, karuna, and depth of understanding what compassion means. So I'll just share a few things that come from Buddhism, from the Buddha, from this tradition. So compassion is sometimes, my understanding is the word in Pali, karuna, is a kind of resonating of the heart with. So that's one aspect of it, kind of feeling the pain and resonating with it. The far enemy, so we talk about the far and near enemy of each of the Brahma Viharas. So the far enemy is like the kind of the obvious, and the near enemy is the less obvious opposite. So the far enemy of compassion is indifference to suffering or numbness. That makes sense. Now that sense of like being indifferent, numb, not actually being willing to touch or connect with the truth of suffering. And then the near enemy of compassion is pitying someone, which is a kind of separation or pulling away from the other. So that's one aspect, that's one near enemy. It's this very subtle, like, okay, I'm connecting, poor you, I feel bad for your suffering, but it has a separation in it. But I'm better off than you. Even I might be able to help you now, but I pity you. Another near enemy of compassion that I've been reflecting on more recently is actually, so if pity is just like a slight pulling away, there's also a falling into an overwhelm, and a kind of like merging and getting overwhelmed, so that we fall into the suffering of the other. So compassion has some quality of finding this point of being totally connected and present with the truth of the suffering, not pulling away and not falling in, which of course is this like dance and the subtlety of tracking that in our own experience of how do we connect without falling in and getting overwhelmed, without pulling away. And something that we just can be tracking. It really gives me that sense of like surfing. It's just like we're surfing the edge, the wave, and not losing our balance in either direction with the suffering. Another thing that I've found helpful is some of the research around compassion. And in particular, the research around the distinction between empathy and compassion. And these are, I will say there's semantics in this. So it's like, how do you define empathy? How do you define compassion? I'm going to define them in particular ways as I describe this. It's using the research of a German researcher named Tanja Singer, who's done a lot of empathy and compassion research and meditation mindfulness, one of the biggest probably the biggest meditation study in the world. It's like multi-year, very cool, super complex research. But she started doing empathy. Well, what she called empathy research. And the way that she did that, one way that she did that, she invited Mathieu Ricard, the monk, the Tibetan monk, to her lab. And because she heard, he's a Tibetan practitioner, he does compassion meditation all the time. At this point, she didn't make a distinction between compassion and empathy. So she invited him to her lab. This guy's an expert at compassion. I'm going to put him in the MRI and study what's happening in his brain when he does what she was calling compassion, empathy practice. So she did. He went into the MRI and he did compassion practice, what he was trained in compassion practice. And when he came out, she was like, well, you were doing it wrong because your pleasure centers lit up when you were doing that. So obviously you can't be doing empathy because you should be reflecting on pain. So how could there be pleasure happening in that? So what are you doing? You must be doing something wrong in there. And so they had a conversation. What they figured out was this distinction, what they started to distinguish between empathy and compassion. So what she was calling compassion, they decided to call empathy, and empathy being attending to pain and suffering and feeling with the pain and suffering of the other. So actually allowing yourself, like that, the concept of mirror neurons, of letting yourself actually feel the pain of the other. And what he was calling compassion practice, like what he was doing, was more of what we are trained in and what my understanding of what the Buddha was pointing to is compassion, which is there's a moment of feeling the pain, connecting with the pain, but then the mind shifts and attends to the wish for that pain to be alleviated. The wish for that pain to be alleviated. This like inclination of the heart for the suffering to be relieved. So it's that simplicity of the suffering to be relieved. And that might have a quality of action. Like, okay, how can I help? But there might not be any help. So it's really just the sense of like, I care about this pain and I want it to be relieved. So these are all our, within the Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, there's Avalokiteshvara, who has the 10,000 arms, and he's the embodiment of compassion, who's sitting there ready to reach out a hand. I think even sometimes the hands have eyes in them. So seeing all the pain in the world and ready to help. Or Kuan Yin in the Mahayana tradition she's seated. She's the embodiment of compassion. And she's seated with one foot forward, ready to stand up at any moment and take action to relieve suffering. And yet with both, it's not like they're also sitting and ready, sitting still, present, but ready. So it's that kind of physical form that we see in some of the deities of compassion. And so that was the clarity that they got to. And so I heard about this research, I don't know, maybe 8-10 years ago. And I was like, I wonder, I'm going to look into this in my own mind. So I really invite you, you might to actually play with this, explore it in your own mind. Can you notice, we can do it right now for a moment. So I'll just like a little practice here. Take a breath. Feels okay. You might close your eyes. And then, in the earlier meditation, if you're there, invited you to touch in to some suffering that you're connected to. And then maybe just in this moment, like, what's a suffering that you've seen in another person? Maybe this is someone close to you. Maybe it's just like reading the news today. Some pain or suffering that you have connected with that impacted you. And so just to start, letting yourself feel that pain. That's a sense of empathy. Just for a moment. And again, keep your mind, think about that titration. So you don't have to dive fully into it, but let yourself just touch and feel. Notice if you feel anything in your heart and body as you reflect on this being's pain and suffering. Okay, and so notice how that feels. This is the sense of empathy. And then I invite you to shift your attention and notice if there's anywhere in you, any part in your mind, in your heart, that has this sense of caring about the pain, wishing for it to be alleviated. This very natural inclination of the heart when we connect to pain to care about it, to wish for it to be alleviated. So just playing with that, maybe a few times you might go back to touching the pain, feeling that, and then shift your attention to the care, the wish for it to be alleviated. And notice what that feels like. Notice what it feels like in your body, in the mind, in the heart. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. They've been closed. All right. Is anyone willing to share your experience? What did you notice? And you could put it in the chat, or you might not be able to unmute yourself, but you could raise your hand and we could unmute you. I'm willing to share. What did you notice? What happened? Did anyone notice a difference in the experience between those two focuses of attention? Yeah. Wow. Scott is saying so easy to shift between tears and peace, love. Right. Nadia writes, when I shifted to compassion and wishing for the pain to go away, I felt lighter. It felt lighter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nellie writes, there's a sense of giving way like beginning to move downhill. Yeah. Yeah, I feel a sense of openness and energy, enlightening, when I shift the attention to that sense of care. And then I think about, the Brahma Vihara is another, it's called the divine abodes, is the direct translation. Another term there in the, especially Mahayana tradition, is the four immeasurables, the boundless qualities of heart. So each of these, metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, are boundless. And there's a sense when I touch into that sense of care, like the energy that's there, sort of like what you're saying of beginning to move downhill, is like, I could see how this could be boundless. You can see how this could be immeasurable and boundless. In a way that when I'm touching into the pain, or really falling into the pain, that has a narrowness to it, and doesn't have as much energy as I could feel with that sense of care. And Nathan writes, I felt more observant, shifting to compassion. Like there's a type of distance that provides a sense of perspective. Yeah. So what I hear in that also is like this quality of equanimity starts to get built in to the compassion. So I invite you just to explore that. This has been like, when the next time you feel maybe some sense of overwhelming, kind of like falling into pain, let yourself just notice that also there's this sense of caring about it, wishing to alleviate, to relieve it. So sometimes that's where we can find the resilience, isn't that? So I'm offering tonight, there's different moments, we need different things, right? So in some moments, like I tried this just now, I was trying it with that sense. I was like, okay, what if I touch collapse? And I was like, I don't know if I can shift to compassion right now when I touch collapse. So we have to know what we actually need in a given moment. Probably more for me, right? I need mourning, a sense of just mourning, being held in the grief of that potentiality. That's another way that we can work with compassion, is just to allow ourselves to soften and be tenderized by it. So that's one possibility you can practice with around heart and mind. Yeah. So Sarah asked this question: how do you stay with wishing the pain to be gone and not needing to fix it? And so even with the sense of wishing the pain to be gone, there's so much subtlety in what compassion is. So I don't know, even the framing of like wishing it to be gone, it's like, it's much more surrendered. The way I experience is much more of a like soft surrender of like, wow, I care about this. I wish there was relief for you, versus sometimes like wishing it to be gone or needing to fix it can start to have a sense of like aversion and control. So I guess the way that, how do you stay in the wishing the pain, like the caring about the pain? A big way for me is tenderness, like softening. So it might also be bringing in equanimity, which we'll talk about now next. Of the equanimity is like this. It's like this admission that things are as they are. It's like, wow, I wish for you to be free from suffering, and your happiness or unhappiness depends upon your actions and not my wishes for you. So bringing in the wisdom or equanimity aspect can allow us to kind of soften into the truth of things without needing to fix or control. How does that land for you, Sarah? Your hand. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. So with all of us, again, it's like our mindfulness practice is also central, right? We need the clarity, presence, and sharpness of our mindfulness to know what's actually happening, to see in our mind, like, ooh, I'm shifting into aversion. It's actually aversion right now. I don't want this to be happening. Or I'm shifting into wanting to control. So all of our mindfulness meditation practice is helping us when we're coming into the Brahma Viharas to see what's really happening right now, what's needed to bring balance to this quality of heart or mind. And actually, before we move fully into to equanimity, I want to read this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. And it's from his Nobel Peace Prize speech. I have another one, but this is not the one that I want. I'll read this one, but there's another one that where he talks about pity. That's so awesome. But sorry, I don't have it. This is the one I do have. It has this aspect of compassion. He writes, the fact that most of the time human beings put the truth about the nature and risks of nuclear war, and we can replace that with so many things: climate change, environmental destruction. So the fact that most of the time human beings put the truth about the nature and risks of the nuclear war out of their minds because it is too painful and therefore not acceptable does not alter the nature and risks of such war. The device of rejection may temporarily cover up anxiety, but it does not bestow peace of mind and emotional security. So that's the far enemy. He's talking about the far enemy of compassion. That this attempt to be indifferent doesn't actually bring us peace. And so I love that that Scott framed it that way. The shift from the pain to the compassion, the empathy to the compassion, brought a sense of peace. Okay. So let's just take a little bit of time to reflect on equanimity, the fourth of the Brahma Viharas. And so equanimity is the traditional phrase for doing equanimity practices. What I was saying before, your happiness or unhappiness, what depends upon your actions and not my wishes for you. Your happiness or unhappiness depends upon your actions and not my wishes for you. Or another traditional phrase is, all beings are the owners of their own karma. All beings are the owners of their own karma. And so again, there's a way that like this could fall into a sense of like coldness or not caring. And so the equanimity is really warmed up by the connection of metta, karuna, mudita, of that care. And yet it brings in this wisdom aspect of things are just as they are. Things are just as they are. That I'm not in control of what happens. I'm not in control, unfortunately, of our political system. I'm not in control of the day-by-day choices people make. Unfortunately, not really. Very fortunate. And you're not, none of us is. So the sense of like, it has within it the wisdom of no self, the wisdom of karma, the wisdom of impermanence. Another way that I find resilience and support from equanimity, or bring in equanimity, is by opening my view really, really wide, like historically, for example. And I'm not sure exactly why this is helpful for me, but when I think about this possibility of collapse of this modern culture and society, the one that I live in, embedded in, and participate in, I actually find it somehow helpful to reflect on other cultures that have met with collapse. There's something that, like, it's just like a reminder of like, oh yeah, like what did it feel like for the Native people in the US as the colonists arrived? And these plagues were running through. Huge numbers of people were dying of sickness and then being moved off their land, and that whole genocide and atrocity. There's something of like, oh yeah, humanity has faced this in different ways. And there's like the longer, then I can zoom out even farther to geologic time, solar system time. Like we know for sure the sun will burn up at some point. So just that sense of like the expansiveness of view has an element of bringing equanimity for me. Yeah. All right, well, this is our time. Thank you for welcoming me and inviting me into your community. Good to be with you. Hope we have more chances, maybe even in person at some point. Good night.
Thank you for listening. To learn how you can support the teachers and Dharma Seed, please visit dharmaseed.org/donate.